Well, great. My name is Joel Rubin. Some of you had me for class in the past here at UIC, but I am the State Director of the National Association of Social Workers here in Illinois. And we're going to talk a little bit about licensure today. And what I really would like to do is get through the sort of prepared stuff and then open it up for questions, because I know this is a period, this generates a lot of anxiety for everyone, so that is natural. So I just want to get through the prepared stuff that I have, and then we can talk about stuff and questions and all that other stuff. Okay, does that sound like a plan? All right, cool. All right, well, this is me. That's my email address. I've been with NASW a long time, 20 years. We're the largest professional association of social workers in the state. If you're not a member now, it's probably smart to join when you're a student, because after whatever that magic date is, May 10th, if you decide, great, I want to start my social work career right then you're no longer going to be able to lock in at that student rate, plus a 3-year transitional rate for leading up to full membership dues. Okay? Interspersed, we'll talk about today not only licensure, but some other stuff about the job market a little bit, because a lot of the stuff, especially when we're talking about clinical supervision and things like that, sort of all hinges on sort of the first job you may take out of graduation as well. Okay? All right. So let me just preface that, so we do a lot of work. We don't get paid by the Illinois Department of Financial Professional Regulation, but we do a lot of their work to help people navigate the process. So saying that, we're not the Illinois Department of Financial Professional Regulation. So if you're really upset about the fees and the process and all the bureaucracy, as Bill Clinton used to say, I feel your pain. The fact of the matter is that what I'm here today to do is to try to help you navigate this process. All right. We have a new director of IDFPR. We have a new governor. We have some optimism in this state for the first time in a long time. So we regularly are in contact with IDFPR to improve this process. All right. So I just had that's sort of like the disclaimer. So especially when I put the fees up here, and everybody's going to go, "Oh my God!" We don't set those fees. All right. So, all right. This is just the general contact information for IDFPR. What you have in front of you is the PDF that was copied. It's generally most of the information on this PowerPoint. There's a couple things that are not correct in that. We are no longer at 404 South Wells. We are moving with the times, and we moved to a very small shared office space. So I'm in a space with people that walk around all day and collaborate and all that other stuff. It's strange, okay? It's a very different type of, but you know what the most important thing is? My rent bill is a lot cheaper. All right. So this is just general information about how to contact IDFPR. IDFPR has offices both in Springfield and here in Chicago. They're actually over at the Thompson Center downtown. Okay. All right. And one other thing that's in the PDF that's also not correct. I think it still says that California does not use, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, the ASWB test. So that's not correct, okay? But this will become clearer as we go on. Okay, so before we get to this, let me just say a couple of words about the importance of licensure. So first of all, social work is a regulated profession. Okay, we have been licensed here in the state of Illinois since 1989, and we worked very hard, not only in Illinois, but all over the country to get licensed. And licensure is important for a lot of reasons. It's important to protect consumers. It's important for our standards. It's important for all of you too, is that when the next part of the journey to get licensed, etc., to say that social work is a licensed profession, right? So you can't, and we'll get into this, but you can't literally call yourself a social worker in this state unless you have an LSW or an LCSW. Don't worry, you're all graduating with an MSW. Your first business card is going to say, John Smith, program coordinator, etc. We'll get into that, but this is very, very serious stuff, and it's very, very important to the fact that we are now licensed in every single state in the union, right? So here in Illinois, and most of you probably know, we have two levels of licensure. One is the LSW, or the licensed social worker. And the second level, which is pretty much the terminal level of licensure here in the state of Illinois, is the LCSW, is the licensed clinical social worker. Right? So now the LSW, which we'll get into, is the initial license that right out of the box after graduation, you can go and get your LSW. It is a non-clinical license. So it doesn't allow you to go out and practice independently. So don't ever try to think that you can do that and push a lot of envelopes with that stuff, because trust me, I always want to think that social workers are different, but we all try to sort of say, let's try to scam the system and do other things and not play by the rules. In this case, you got to be really careful. All right? The LCSW is the clinical license, and that is going to require you to get 3,000 hours of clinical experience. And we're going to go into the details in that in a second. So the question becomes, that many of you probably have, one second, we'll just bring all this stuff up here, is, well, should I just wait and get my LCSW because I'm eventually going to go into clinical work? How many people are more or less in the clinical track here at school? Okay, so almost everybody. Anyone sort of like the small minority of us that are macro practice people? All right. All right, great. All right, so the LSW, which is a level of licensure that you can get immediately without clinical hours, is important for a lot of reasons. One is that right out of the box, you graduate May 10th, generally what the process here, and I'm assuming that at some point during the semester, if you've not done it already, the school's going to start to talk to you about those next steps. The university is going to send your information, transcripts down to IDFPR. They're going to confer your degree. Until they do that, you cannot apply to be pre-approved to take the test. Now, I don't control when the university does that. I don't know if they're going to do that May 15th. I don't know if they're going to do that May 20th. I don't know if they're going to do that June 1st. That is, you're going to have to talk to them, and they should let you know when they're going to do that. All right? So what I say to people, if they're saying, I'm just going to wait and get my LCSW, my answer to those questions of should I get my LSW right away, it really depends on two things that we all have an abundance of. One is time, and one is money, right? We all have a lot of that. So what I'm saying is that with sitting for the LSW immediately, you're going to have fees for the test, which we're going to go over in a little bit. But you're also not going to have to accumulate your hours. Now, it could very well be that there are work settings that will say, and I'm sure you're already starting to look for work, talk to people, etc., that will say all these kinds of things. 5 years experience, license preferred, sometimes, especially like in a hospital setting, where they'll say, we want you to, we really like you, we really want you to come on board, but we really like you to get your initial license as soon as possible. That then is probably, what you need to do. The second thing is that if you get an LSW, you immediately can put that on a LinkedIn profile, you can put it on a business card, you are licensed at the sort of initial level here in the state of Illinois. So that's sort of, I'm preempting a question that may come up, and it comes up all the time. We don't require in Illinois that you have to have an LSW before you sit for your clinical exam. It's just that it's available to do. And most people who are not, or are thinking of maybe not going on a clinical route and want to be licensed, will go the LSW route. All right? Now, some of you BSW, how many of you have BSW here? Okay, so a couple of you probably came in, did advanced standing, etc. But BSW is actually, that's the only level of licensure available for a BSW, but it requires hours, etc. That's irrelevant right now because you're graduating when you're around MSW. All right, so LSW, LCSW, which appears to be that this is most likely what most of you are thinking of doing. All right, so the LSW requires you to complete 3,000 hours of, do you need another copy of this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's more here. Requires you to have 3,000 hours of supervised clinical experience. Okay? So that generally means that, and I'm going to jump around, some of these slides will overlap, but 3,000 hours is generally about 2 years worth of full-time work. Right? So the question may come is, okay, I graduate, I get a job offer, and it's at a small agency, and there's nobody to supervise me. All right. So let's jump. Oh, I'm going to come back to this, but we're going to jump to the supervision part. We'll come back to the other stuff in a minute. What do I do? Well, to get your clinical supervision, you have to be supervised by an LCSW. That does not mean that your boss or your immediate supervisor with a small s can be a PsyD, an LCPC, etc. But your actual clinical supervision has to be done by an LCSW. Now, what I tell people all the time is that, I hate to break it to you, but when I graduated Jane Addams, I also thought that I was going to be the CEO immediately at age 25, right? And that's a great attitude to have. You should always think that way. But the reality is that your first job out of graduate school may not be your dream job, okay? But if you're thinking about supervision, and let's take an example. Okay, anyone doing a field placement at Thresholds? I don't want to pick on Thresholds. But Thresholds is a big, big agency. Okay, multi-million-dollar operation, lots of LCSWs working there. It may not be my dream job, but guess what? I go in there, I work for 3 or 4 years, I get my clinical supervision. If I went to work for that small agency doing really cool, innovative work, not that Threshold is not doing that kind of really good work, and that agency may not have an LCSW to supervise me, I'm going to have to find an LCSW on the open market to supervise me. So when you're thinking about that first job, if you monetize, sorry, it always comes back to money, but when you monetize what it's going to cost to get supervision, it may be worth it to take a job where you know that there's an LCSW. That's the first question you should be asking when you go into the interview too. The second is, will you pay for my licensure fees, etc.? If you don't ask, you won't know. and they can always say no. But it may be worth it for that as well. You know what? I'm going to preempt and say, I'm going to try to get through everything first, and then I'm going to take questions. All right? So let's just hold that, because I know everything I'm saying is probably, you're probably thinking, oh man, you know, questions. So we'll just get through all this stuff first. Supervision can also be done part-time. I graduate, maybe I'm going to sort of ease into it. I don't want to work full-time right now. Maybe I have other things, other obligations, family, other things, that kind of stuff. You can also get your clinical supervision as a volunteer. But it has to be clinical experience. It can't be making copies for the CEO. It can't be managing the agency's social media, right? Oh, you're a younger social worker. Hey, can you just sort of like take care of our Twitter account type thing, right? Which unfortunately probably some of you have had to do in your internships, but I'm not going to comment on that. So there's different ways to get your supervision. The requirement is you have to meet 4 hours per month with your supervisor. Now you can either meet with your supervisor on a one-on-one basis, or what a lot of people do, and especially some agencies will do it because it's more cost-effective, especially also if you're looking to, and you don't have an LCSW in your agency to get supervision, you can get your supervision within a group of no more than 5 people. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to get your supervision, but just keep it in the back of your head that first job, you need to think about that. You may not think of it as a benefit, but if you think about the fact that if going out on the market and finding someone to supervise you, to get your clinical supervision, even if they're going to give it to you on a sliding scale, could cost you anywhere from $200 to $300 a month. Okay? And then multiply that by 12, and that's a lot of money. So if you think about it, that in some ways is probably a $6,000 to $8,000 benefit over the 2 years from your agency. That's how you have to start thinking about this stuff. I know you want to have get out and do incredible work, which you all will do, but you also have to think about these real things and these professional things, because that's essentially, in general, it's going to make you a better social worker, all right? And it's going to help the people you're trying to help as well, if you're comfortable and you're getting the proper supervision and everything else. All right, so that's a little bit about supervision. It also can happen that you start a job, everything's great, I'm getting my supervision, and all of a sudden my clinical supervisor decides to pick up and move to California because the weather's a little bit better, all right? It's fine because you can have multiple supervisors during the 3,000 hours. You just have to keep records, all right? So that's a little bit about clinical supervision. So let's go back a little bit and we don't have to worry about this because you all you've all graduated from an accredited school of social work. So now don't shoot the messenger, and don't get upset with me. As I said at the outset, don't get upset with me. All right, write a letter to J.B. Pritzker. All right, these are the fees. This is the cost of doing business as a professional. Now, as I said earlier, one of the things when you go in and you're talking, and boy, I really want to work at this agency, they really like you, when can you start? You have to ask these questions, say, you know what, I really want, and most agencies are going to know it, I want to be taking my LCSW exam eventually. Would you be able to help me out with that? It's a fair question. Or can you help me out with some other stuff? Send me to a conference, pay for my association, my professional association dues, of course. If you don't ask, you won't know. And someone can say, I'm sorry, but we don't have it in our budget. That's a stupid way to respond, frankly, because it's pennies on the dollar if you're trying to develop staff and keep staff. But as an employer, when someone asks me really thoughtful questions or really concrete questions, that sets off a bell in my head to say, this person's really thinking about their professional future and how, frankly, it could benefit the association, the agency. All right? So these are the fees, etc. And it's the cost of doing business. It's like any other profession, which has same types of fees, and generally a lot more money. Okay? All right, so we talked a little bit about supervision. So, said earlier, these are the 2 levels of licensure in the state of Illinois. And some states have 4 or 5 levels of licensure. You go up to Wisconsin, they have like a pre-LCSW. You know, they have all different kinds of levels of licensure. We only have 2. And there's 2. Basically, if you're taking, when you take the test, and the test is administered by an organization called the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB. Some of you have probably already been on ASWB's website. They have information about all the requirements for each state in the union as far as licensure. They also have licensure prep materials. They also have an app where they have questions. You can do practice questions for the test as well, but we'll get into test preparation in a little bit. But there are 2 levels of licensure and 2 tests, master's level and the clinical level. So ASWB prepares this test. If you go and sit for the whatever, if it's the LSW or the LCSW, you can have those test scores sent anywhere in the country. So if you want to leave the great city of Chicago, and I don't know why anyone would want to do that, you can have your test scores sent to Oregon. You can have your test scores sent to Rhode Island, wherever you're thinking of perhaps going. All right. But again, ASWB prepares the test, and now every state in the country uses the ASWB test. It used to be that California was the last holdout. Of course, California always likes to do things differently. California used to have an oral part of the exam for licensure. So they have finally, I think it's now 2 years ago, they are now using the ASWB test. Okay. All right, so the actual test is, once you go through the whole process of IDFPR to get pre-approved to take the exam, you'll be taking a test at there's a wide range of testing sites in the Chicago area. It's all a touch screen when you sit for the test, and you will know your test results at the end of the test. So either you're going to be static, which hopefully many of you will be. In the event that you don't pass the test the first time, you can take it as many times as you'd like, but you have to wait 90 days to take the exam, and yes, you have to pay the fees again. All right? That's the way it goes. A passing score is 75, and it's a weighted score. Like I said, you're going to be sitting in a testing center with, all different kinds of people taking tests for a multitude of professions that are regulated by the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about testing itself. So, I have traditionally been a bad tester, okay? Terrible. Did terrible on my ACTs, did terrible on any test I've ever took, just because that's, I don't know, my brain doesn't work that way. People learn differently. People learn to prepare for a test differently. We all know people who can, you know, maybe look at some practice questions, go out and party the night before, take the exam, and they pass and everything's fine, okay? We all hate people like that. But some people can just go and be very disciplined on their own and, you know, get a bunch of online material, go through, you know, all the suggested things that online sort of test prep stuff will provide for you. And then there's some of us that I need someone to stand and deliver, to sort of review with me all the, you know, I've had a really good education here at Jane Addams, but it's a test. And sometimes we need that. Some of you, you know, and, you know, preparing for undergrad or maybe another graduate program, maybe took a Stanley Kaplan course or Princeton Review course, whatever the case may be, to help in those kinds of things. So that's all how you test and study for things. So we offer, NASW offers a review, licensure review class, and we offer a bunch of them. Mostly right over here at the Fall Center and their conference center. And it's an all-day test. And you know, we give you a big, thick booklet, and it basically goes through all the different components of the test. And that's if this is how you learn. Probably the only other game in town, as far as actual review, in-person review courses, is the University of Chicago has a 3 or 4 session review course over, you know, a period of several weeks. So these are the upcoming classes, and it just all depends on how you learn. All right? Now, so that's a little bit, so why don't we do this? Let's take 1 or 2 questions now about this part, and then we're going to go start talking about the actual process and when you're licensed. So questions now for, yeah.
How much is it to take that review?
The review course is for members, I believe it's $195 for the day, and for non-members it's, because I ran out of my office without, you can go on our website, you'll see the cost. There's like a $50 or $60 differential between a member and non-member rate. So if you join NASW still as a student, it makes sense to sort of, you'll get the member rate that as well. You know, as far as these kind of prep courses, it's, you know, it's as reasonable as we can as far as, you know, having to pay an instructor and everything else. And it all depends on how, you know, on how you learn. I can't tell you the pass rate of anyone who's taken the class. The only people that know about pass rates are the schools. Okay, wow. We do not have access to anyone's pass rate on the exam, but it's just another way to sort of prepare for a test. And sometimes it's, you know, sometimes it's good to sort of go over and say these are the questions that are, this is the approach to the questions. The test, you know, the course will also tell you the percentages of what will be included in the exam. Obviously, everything that now in the exam is about the DSM-5, which we've all, you know, which now that's what everybody has been learning the past couple of years as well. Right? Other questions before we move on? Yeah.
How do they judge being a good moral character?
Okay, so yeah, that's, I know. So generally, and we generally don't have any problems with that. There are sometimes issues with, and this has become a real hot button issue, if someone has in their background, whether it's a felony or something like that, you're generally not going to have a problem. We've had some issues, unfortunately, and there's been a case that in which a disability rights organization got involved in this, and where someone who was taking the exam, when they came to those questions about listing any kind of possible, I think there's a question in there about any kinds of things that would, inhibit you. This person put down her actual mental health diagnosis. And so unfortunately, IDFPR went and flagged that on their website, and it took forever to get this thing off, etc. But there generally should not be a problem with that. We actually passed a bill last year in the General Assembly. Actually, some of you were at Advocacy Day last year, Social Work Advocacy Day. It was a bill that actually does would not discriminate against anyone who is not documented if they wanted to take the licensure exam as well. Okay? That's generally the answer to that. So let's talk a little bit about the process itself. These days, it's taking about 8 to 10 weeks to get pre-approved for the exam. Yes, that really stinks, okay? I rarely stick up for state agencies, but the fact of the matter is that IDFPR does not have the bandwidth to be processing all these things, okay? And I say that because our organization takes calls on a daily, hourly basis, or emails about this process. Why is it taking? Unfortunately, that's the reality. So we think of the timeline right now. So say you want to I'm going to go get the LSW right away. Now it's just fresh in my brain. I most likely will pass the exam. I'll have a license. It won't be a clinical license. Let's say that the university confers your degree on June 1st, okay? IDFPR has the information, you apply. If it takes that long, then you're looking probably to get pre-approval to take the exam sometime in August, all right? Now, don't freak out that, employers basically know, unfortunately, the sort of snail's pace that this goes in. So if you're hired and the employer is saying, we really want you to get your license, your LSW immediately, they know exactly it. Say, hey, this is the process, I've applied and everything else. That is the reality of things. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything here, okay? We meaning NASW, we have not yet had a chance to sit down with the new secretary at IDFPR to talk about a lot of this stuff, because this continues to be a problem. We've brought this up with successive secretaries. They simply don't have, they have so-called bloated state government that Bruce Rauner used to talk about. The fact of the matter is that we don't have a lot of people to be doing a lot of this processing work, okay? Nonetheless, this doesn't make you feel any better, or when you call down to Springfield and you get a busy signal all the time. So that's my general answer about sort of the process, all right? Other questions regarding what we've talked about so far before we move on to when you're licensed? Yeah.
You said that you need to retake the test, you have to pay all the fees, so you're referring to the $230 fee or just the testing fee?
The testing fees, yeah, and then the the testing fees, yeah. So, and you have to wait 90 days. All right. So, now, you go, you take the exam, whether it's the LSW or the LCSW, you pass, you fill out more paperwork, you get your license, and you are then bound by a variety of regulations. One is you're obviously bound by our Practice Act. And our Practice Act, that's the actual statute, the law. And then along with that are the actual rules. So all the different rules about continuing education, supervision, etc. Included in the rules too is adherence to the code of ethics, right? So this is, this is important stuff. You've all studied the code in class, but when you're licensed, you are bound by the code. So that means that if someone, and I'm sure that all of you are going to go out and be awesome social workers, but in this day and age, people can file complaints all the time. And they can file a complaint by looking at a specific standard of the code. Oh, that person didn't, there wasn't complete closure of the case, or all the different standards in the code as well. You're also bound by the Illinois Mental Health Code as well. So this is serious stuff. Then the bigger question is, what about the issue of reciprocity? So if I get my license in Illinois, does that mean that I can go and practice in Indiana? So what's the answer? No. Right? That makes a lot of sense. No. So there is no direct reciprocity, unfortunately, at this point in time between states. So if I'm going to get my LCSW and in 5 years' time, my dream job is out there in Portland, Oregon. What I need to do is contact that social work board in Oregon. Usually it's best to start with the NASW chapter and find out what I need to do to make sure that my license will be recognized. It's rare that you're not going to have to go and take the test again. But what you should do is that if you're licensed in one state and you want to get licensed in another state, make sure that's all taken care of before you pack up the car and drive across the country to start your job. Because if you're not licensed in that state, you're not going to be able to practice. Now I say this, and for those of you who were in my 420 class, I think we talked a little bit about the whole notion of telehealth and telemedicine. This is incredibly important today. This is the new reality. This is what you are all going to be working with. The problem is that, and I can say this because that's what I do. I deal with social work 24/7 with the association. We have not been as quick to recognize the whole issue of licensure and portability of licensure when it comes to telemedicine. Right? So some of you probably work in a hospital setting. Maybe some of you anyone work in the VA here doing an internship? Okay, so there's probably telemedicine stuff going on all the time. So someone's going to be seeing someone, a doc's going to be seeing someone, and that doctor may be, licensed in the state of Arizona. But because the doctors have a medical compact, they're able to practice across state lines through telehealth. We don't have that yet, and it's really important because, unfortunately, a lot of people practice now without thinking like that. So, we hear stories all the time. People will say, yeah, I have this encrypted software, and I have a client in Connecticut that I used to see when she was in high school, and now she's in college, and we still work. Well, the problem is everything's good until it's not good. And let's say that, unfortunately, God forbid, that client takes her life. And they start doing the investigation, and they say, oh, here's the social worker from Chicago, but they weren't licensed in the state of Connecticut. So that's part of the issue. There's a lot of movement in trying to move this issue forward. This comes up quite a bit, especially in areas of the state where you're, like, someone is like working in southern suburbs or northwest Indiana. You're going to be seeing clients both in, say, Munster, Schererville, Cal City, southern suburbs. It probably makes sense that you get licensed both in the state of Indiana and the state of Illinois. Okay? Same thing if you're working down in, near the, southwestern Illinois, near St. Louis, same thing. People will see clients on both sides of the river. And same thing if you're working towards the, near the Wisconsin border. That's the reality of things right now. We don't really yet have reciprocity, but this is a really, really important issue that we got to fix, okay? And there, the Association of Social Work Boards that I mentioned earlier is working on this along with NASW and other folks as well. So, all right. All right, so I get licensed and everything's great, but you're not through. So one of the things about being a professional is that there's really lifelong learning that takes place. The social work profession doesn't become any less complicated as we move forward in time. In fact, it becomes more complicated. And so that means that every 2 years, once you're licensed, you have to accumulate 30 hours of continuing education units. Now, probably you see it either if you're working or in your field place, and you probably see at your agency, your hospital, in service, 3 CEUs are being provided, etc. So in Illinois, you have to have 30 continuing education units every 2 years. 15 of those have to be done in a face-to-face manner, and 15 of those can be online. 3 of those have to be in the area of ethics, and 3 of those have to be in the area of cultural competency. Okay? So one of the things when you initially get licensed, so let's say that you get your LCSW and whenever in the end of 20, whenever let me just take a step back. Social workers renew their license all at the same time in the state of Illinois. So our licensure starts December 1st of the odd year. Right? There's been a lot of odd years lately in this country, but December 1st of the odd year. So December 1st, 2019 is the beginning of the 2-year cycle, which then ends November 30th, 2021. So let's say that I decide to get this is how people try to work the system. The first time you get your license, you don't have to get CEU. The state just feels so wonderful about you getting your license that you don't have to get. It's written in our state. You get a buy. Okay, I'm a big sports fan. You get a buy until the end of that licensure cycle. So what people try to do, and it usually doesn't work out this way, but let's say I go and get my LSW December 15th, 2019. I picked that date, it's my birthday. So anyway, 2019, December 15, 2019. The new licensure cycle just starts. I don't have to accumulate any CUs for that entire cycle. Now things don't usually work out that well. I'm not ready to take the test, I don't have the time. But you get a buy that first time you get your license. You sort of don't have to accumulate CEUs. Come December 1st, 2021, I got to start accumulating my CEUs. All right? So, and continuing education is really important. And I can't tell you that, so many people just do it because, it's a burden, I got to do this to maintain my license. But if you take it seriously and are always trying to learn more techniques, more nuances, things are constantly changing. If I would have told you 5-10 years ago when we still, the opioid emergency was really an emergency then, but if I would have told you then that we would have this amount of need for people to really have an understanding of this, I got to go get some training on that. I got to understand. I got to understand about naloxone. I need to find out about this stuff. Well, there's a lot of professional development out there that to get, you know, so I can get my CEUs. That's partly why we decided in 2013, and we worked with a wide-ranging group of social workers to cap the amount of online CEUs. Now, I'm not saying that online education is, you know, subpar. But sometimes people do online education, and there's a lot of stuff out there that, you know, hey, you know, basically read this chapter and you'll get your CEUs. There's a lot of garbage out there. Be really clear about that. That's not going to do you any good. It may help you in your requirement, but it's not going to help you in your learning and getting up, you know, keeping up to date on things. And so this always takes place. I mean, another perfect example is like, was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, when we were transitioning from the DSM-4 to DSM-5, everyone had to get up to date on the DSM-5. So a lot of organizations, including NASW, would do a lot of training on the new DSM-5, and people were able to get their continuing education credit through that. So it's basically to your benefit. It's going to help you advance as a professional. So now, the thing about CEUs too is that it's an honor system. So I get my 30 CEUs. It's not like I have, you know, I renew my license, but you need to keep records of everything. Now, IDFPR has not, unfortunately, been doing regular audits of, just like the IRS periodically does audits of people. But you should always just keep records of that stuff. And these days, you know, NASW we have a product called CE Tracker, or you can just throw it in a manila folder, all your certificates, or put it up in some file, you know, on the cloud, or whatever the case may be. All right? All right, so this is a little bit about, so it's sort of in the weeds about CEUs. You know, the handout talks more about that stuff. But you can get CEUs not just by attending a class, but you can also get CEUs for presenting a workshop, for writing a paper, you know, teaching a class as well. All right. So, all right. So let's. I'm going to jump through. All right. So let's open it up now for questions about anything about the process. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer most of your questions, and if not, I will say I can't answer it, and I'll have to get back to you on things. But let's open it up for questions. Yeah.
Can you apply and take the review courses before you're like approved?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people just wait till they're approved because then they know I'm approved, and then I can decide when, you know. So it all depends. But if you want to take the review course, you know, whenever, you don't have to be pre-approved yet. So yeah, that, you know. Generally, a lot of people do is that once they get pre-approved and they sort of have a general idea when they're going to take the exam, they'll take the review course, and then they'll sort of bone up and study, and then take the exam. Other questions? Yeah.
I have a question about gaming the system. We're all about to graduate in May, and then you said it probably wouldn't be until like August would be like the earliest that we could even sit for the test. It's 2019, it's going to renew December 21st, so that means we don't have to do our CEUs between like what, September through November. Would it be beneficial to wait to sit for the test until after December 1st?
I think you answered your question. Yeah, I mean, it unless you have an employer that says to you, you know, I'm sorry, your name?
Spencer.
So Spencer, great name's my son-in-law's name. So, you know, your employer will say, Spencer, we really need you to take your LSW exam as soon as possible. Then that may be, you may not have a choice. So gaming the system may also conflict with what your employer wants as well. But that's generally how it works, but we're never sort of in control of that stuff either. Oh, something comes up, or I don't have time, I'm not ready to take the exam. That's another issue as well. So, yeah.
Does NASW have any restrictions or restrictions or limitations on telehealth within the state lines, or is it just out of state
So
lines?
we actually have, there is a set of standards for tech. They were released last June, I think. They're standards on technology, okay? And they were written jointly by NASW and the Association of Social Work Boards, and it goes into a whole variety of things about that. What I will say, the restrictions are basically all depend on licensure, okay? So you can be, practicing telehealth within the state of Illinois if you're seeing something. A lot of insurance companies do this too. I mean, you'll be working and they'll be saying, okay, this is the encrypted software, HIPAA compliant. And I got to tell you, it'll make your hair stand on end. But we have, unfortunately, sometimes we see this all the time, and all the listservs we have of people. Like I'm seeing someone through FaceTime. What? Or Skype. That's not exactly too secure. All right, even I know that. So that's a real issue in sort of educating people. Because it's like anything else, people will go ahead and use a certain will go ahead and do that and just think it's okay until it's not okay, like I said earlier. So yeah, so we do have standards. We periodically do trainings on technology and not just telehealth, but look, you probably have talked about this in class too. It's a whole new world out there. You're sitting with a client and they've already sort of, scoped you out, and they've gone on and they've Googled you, they've tried to friend you on Facebook, they've tried, to look at your Twitter feed, to look at all those kinds of things. That now is really changing how clinicians work. Probably the best person that writes about this is Frederick Reamer, and he is probably, Frederick Reamer is an academic, works at the University of Rhode Island, but he is pretty much responsible for what the Code of Ethics looks like today. And he writes prolifically about the standards and the code. It also writes a real lot. So if you just search him online, you'll see a ton of stuff. And Rick talks a lot about this whole new area that we're in right now. But the general restrictions really have to do with licensure. Other questions? Yeah.
Is there restrictions on how many hours we can work a week? Like, can you work overtime and that counts? No?
No, yeah.
It's just
You can work overtime. I'm sure you will work overtime. But that's how it works. It's not like I can. It's just like it's like CUs. It's like, oh, I went on this study trip to whatever, Costa Rica, and I got 400 CUs. Can I just bank those for the next? We wish it was that easy. So the answer is unfortunately no, you can't. So, yeah.
Are you able, if you switch jobs in the middle of getting your clinical hours, can you accrue those?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As long as you're just keeping your records, you're meeting at the same amount of time, and it could very well be that you could change a job during that period of time. So, yeah.
And when keeping track of those records, are you just writing down, for yourself, who your, LCSW is, and then,
Right. So
how
a lot of times there will be, you'll sit down with your supervisor, and they'll have a lot of your people who are doing your supervision have done this before, so they'll either have their forms as well. On the actual application, and just a word about the application, they still have to work on that after numerous complaints we've made over the years. The application for A to get pre-approved and then B for licensure is more or less a PDF of a copy of a PDF of, sort of all slapped together. It's not like a real simple online application that are not there yet. I mean, believe it or not, IDFPR just redid their website like 2 years ago, so it's a little bit more, manageable. But those are, you're just going to have specific records, make sure that, obviously, that your supervisor is, his or her license is current as well, and just keep those records. Some of you may have a tendency to keep everything. Some of you have a tendency to throw everything out. This is one thing you should never throw out. Save it however you need to save it. And sometimes it becomes really important, especially if you move somewhere around the country as well. Yeah.
Is there a time period or limit after you graduate when you can, like, say you don't pursue a clinical job for like 5 years?
From when you can take the exam, once you get pre-approved?
More like when you start accumulating your hours, so say like you don't do the 5 years, like doing.
I mean, if you're working part-time, it's going to take you longer than 2 years. It's probably going to take you maybe 4 years, 5 years. And some people just, maybe they're at a job, maybe they're at a job initially for a year or two and it's not a clinical job. And then they say, I really want to do clinical work. Or they had, or it's taken them some time to get clinical. It's not like, I start this job and I really have to get it done within 2 years. So there was a question back there, yeah.
With regard to the CEUs, how can you tell between like ones that are more credible and ones that are garbage?
Great question. Okay, so we are an approved provider in the state of Illinois, NASW Illinois, and NASW National. So say you get licensed and you work for a great agency and they say, we really want to send you to a conference. I'm like, hey, excellent. The first thing you need to do is check on the conference website or whatever it is and see if they are providing CEUs, okay? That's one. As far as the quality goes, you need to do some research on that as well. It's interesting. Sometimes when you go to a conference, you think something really looks good on paper, and you get to the workshop, and it's just absolutely awful. It's all about due diligence. You can get a seal of approval from NASW, but sometimes a workshop presenter may not be the best. We try to really work hard in the state, in the Illinois chapter, of really trying to provide quality professional development, and that, and we know sometimes from our conferences if we get evaluations, and part of the CEU process, if you're a provider of CEUs, you are required to evaluate the program, and then you submit those when you have to renew your CEU license. So we will generally look very closely at evaluations to say, this is not working out so well, or this person is not the best. I think you just you need to do your due diligence and do the research on things. This seems like a really interesting topic, but I don't know anything about the speaker. The problem sometimes with speakers too, in this day and age as well, everybody is the wow, and you go on a LinkedIn page, I'm an expert and this and that. You got to do your due diligence, because there's sometimes it may not be that they're all that's cracked up to. But the initial quality control is that they're an approved provider, because we approve. So we approve things. We approve CEU events, our own stuff that we approve, but we make sure that we review the content. There has to be specific objectives according to the statute, and hopefully everything will work out as well. And then sometimes you find out that you know, you get evaluations back and say, well, this person was really bad, and they really read, they read from the PowerPoint the whole time. So that's, you know, that's a challenge.
So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Ideally, there'll be like something on the website, or it'll say that the NASW approves it.
What it'll do is that if you'll go on to whatever, I don't know, some organization or some clinic, you know, they're doing a conference here in Chicago. You will, sometimes you'll say, it'll say nurses, social workers, lawyers can get your continuing education. Then you need to click through and say, oh, okay, we are approved to provide CEUs. So that generally means that either a state chapter of NASW has approved their CEUs, or the organization itself approves CEUs. Never, ever go to a conference, plunk down your money without knowing that if you ever see something that says, you know, we've applied for, you know, social work CEUs, just find another conference. Because then what happens is if they're not an approved provider, you're going to have to go through this whole process with IDFPR, pay an additional fee for them to review the CEUs. It's just not worth it. So, yeah.
Two questions. One, can we go to conferences in other states and it counts for a CEU here?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. When it's approved by NASW, you're fine. If you look in our statute, it will specifically say NASW and its affiliates.
Okay.
Okay, so that means that if I go to a conference in Iowa and it's, you know, got the NASW CEU approval, then you're fine.
Okay. And my second question, and maybe this is a better question for me just to go on the website and look, but what are the specialty credentials and certifications that are offered through an NASW
Sure.
membership?
So credentials are a whole other bag, you know, another whole other discussion, but the most important credential obviously is your license, okay? But then what I generally tell people about credentials is that it usually depends on where you're at during your career, okay? So it may be that when you first start your career, you may already have a CADC, and you're working in substance abuse for 5 years, and then you get to a point where, like, I'm more really interested in working with older adults or honing my clinical skills. So we have a whole variety, NASW has a whole variety of credentials that you can get, and they're basically sort of, you know, certificate programs. Sometimes they review your sort of work background, and then sometimes there are more extensive sort of clinical credentials that one can get as well. And it all depends on where you're at in your career. And I can just take a look at my own career, is that I have this oddball credential on my, it's called the CAE. It has nothing to do with social work. But it's because I work in the association world now. I mean, I run the social work association, social work, you know, the whole deal. But I run an association, and there's a whole body of knowledge of board governance, etc. So I have a credential that's called the CAE, which is Certified Association Executive. It's not a state license. There's no license for association managers. It's a credential that the American Society of Association Executives offers. You have to take a test. You have to study, etc., and you get that credential. So it really depends on what part of your career you're at with credentials. And that's why I always just say to people, you know, if you're working in the field of aging, and there's something that, you know, either through NASW or another organization, you say, well, this would be really, really good, you should be looking at it, or asking your employer to pay for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, so like for the like CADC, for example, so if you're like working in substance use, like would you have to like go back to school, or like what would it be?
For a CADC?
Yeah.
So CADC, you do have to take some courses.
Okay.
What I know with the CADC, does Janie Addams do a thing where you can come out with a CADC? They used to, many years ago maybe. But you have to do some kind of field placement.
Okay.
But I don't know if that means you can do it in your place of work. But that's a sort of, a credential that may help you, especially if, you want to be working, these days, working, in field with, with opioid, the whole opioid crisis. But that's just another step. CADC is interesting because a lot of people who have CADCs, as many of you know, are people that, are sort of, people that, have lived experience with substance abuse. And there's a lot of, there are sometimes debates between, the licensed clinical world and the CADC world, with the, with people who have an LCSW or the equivalent in another state, saying, well, I'm going to be working in substance use, I don't really need the CADC. So, but that's another particular thing. And I don't know the specifics of how long it takes for that, but I know it's a couple of classes, and I know for sure there's some kind of field component to the CADC. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.